calling in from a conference in Las Vegas for the Oracle user group. So I'm looking forward to getting this session kicked off. This is one of our Community Café events, and we're delighted that people are joining and that we're able to create another asset. That we'll make available by the iLearn Academy. As a reference, for people who are interested in this subject. As I say, I'm Pat Neary. I'm just getting things kicked off today. We are recording the session, and as I say, that session will be made available, through the Dimension Hub, and will be able to be found on the iLearn DWS Academy. And our host today, presenter today, is Lee Balsam. Lee's joining us from New Zealand, and we're going to be talking about Dimension Focus and the dashboard and some of the reports and information that are out there. So with that, again, I'll thank you guys for joining. Really pleased to have people participating in these sorts of sessions and keeping the DWS community sort of alive. And we'll hand over to Lee. We'll let Lee take you through the materials, and Lee will close down as well. So I'm just going to go off into the background and let you guys get on with it. All right, Lee, over to you.
Thank you, Pat, and welcome, guys. Okay, I will just share my screen and let's do that. Take that out of the way. Okay, so welcome. Great to have you guys here with us today. Just a couple of housekeeping things. I assume my screen is visible. If I jump onto mute every now and again, it's because I'm recovering from a COVID cough, and I will put you on mute and then come straight back to save you hearing my hacking cough. Right, we're here today to talk about the Dimension Focus dashboard, to explain the reason for it, the benefits of it, what it can do for you as part of the Dimension Focus overall deliverable. I thought what I'd first do is set the scene to put the dashboard into context, because it is part of a wider product. The scene that's being set is that you are working away in your 9.2 environment. Everything's going well, but you decide there needs to be a change event, and that change event is going to be an ESU or a number of ESUs, or even a code current taking an update event where you're going to apply the update maybe at the end of the year or into the new year, that's going to apply the cumulative set of ESUs, a whole bunch of objects going to be entering the system and changing. The idea with Dimension Focus, of course, is to give you that test planning and management tool. So the information that you need in order to go about the best way of doing the testing. What is impacted as a result of this change entering your system? Who is impacted in the business, and how do you go about testing these objects that are ultimately affected by this change? So that's what Dimension Focus delivers to you. From a practical point of view, the process involved is that you've decided you're going to take these ESUs, or a number of ESUs, one or more. You download those from Oracle via the Change Assistant. You run the Dimension Extract process, which is a little executable that captures the details of the objects in the ESUs, the code of those objects, applications, UBEs, of course, because that's where a lot of the code is, but also business functions and the specs of data structures and all those other small object types as well. It also captures, likewise, objects from production and pristine, so that we can get a before image of your code and an after image of what's coming in those ESUs. So that extract takes place. You upload the results to DWS. We perform that analyzing, that number crunching, and to work out what is impacted. We upload those results to the hub, and the Dimension Hub is where you sign in to view the Dimension Focus results, and that's the screen you're looking at right now. The only screen I have bypassed to get to this point is just the sign-on user and password. So here we are. We're looking at the Dimension Focus main screen. What I'm going to do now is drill down into the Dimension dashboard. The dashboard is probably your first port of call, and how Dimension Focus is used is going to slightly differ depending on who the user is. So we've designed dimension focus to be usable obviously by the testing manager, by the functional testers, by the technical testers as well. So depending on who you are, it depends on sort of where you head in the hub and what value you'll get out of the different screens and so on. The dashboard is part and parcel of that. You may only go into the dashboard as the dimension test as the test manager 3, 4, half a dozen times to get that holistic view of what is the impact of the change that we are planning to take of these ESUs. Further to the dashboard, we're not going to be covering these things today, but I wanted to just briefly talk about them because they are part of the wider dimension focus. Is the testing heat map, where you drill down into the objects involved, get into the nitty-gritty, the detail, and the linker screen, which is the screen, really cool screen that shows you what paths you need to take within a given application in order to test it. So for instance, you wanted to test P4210. What dimension focus might do is tell you that in order to test P4210, for example, you only need to go into the work with form, and you only need to tab out of this field or row exit from the grid or whatever the action may be. You don't necessarily need to test the entire application. So saving you an awful lot of time. But that's down the track. That's a bit later on in a different session. Today we're looking at the dimension focused dashboard. So I've come into the dashboard. Each of these tabs on the right is going to give us a little bit of information that builds a picture of what is the change as a result of taking these ESUs. Bear in mind, we haven't applied the ESUs yet. You haven't installed them to the system. This is information that's given to you up front. And as a result of this information, you can decide, do we actually want to take this ESU? Is the testing requirement, is the implication too large at this point in time? Should we postpone it? Or should we'll go for it because actually the testing isn't as bad as we thought it might be? That's the sort of information that you'll glean from dimension focus. So on this first screen, for example, the object impact, what I'm looking at here are the applications that happen to also be in the ESUs that we're applying. And the graph on the side just gives us information about the color coding matching here as to which applications in this ESU are impacted between 0 and 20%. And in this case, we can see 6 items. So for example, P01012, the address book maintenance application, it has 7 affected events. So Oracle, in this case, in this set of ESUs, have made some kind of change within 7 events across 2 forms, out of a total of 66 possible events and 6 forms. So this quite large and complex application is actually only mildly affected. Usually it might take us a good few days to test that properly if we were to test the entire application or as a business our entire use of that application. But in this case, hopefully our testing will be substantially less. So this gives us that a little bit of information, a lead into what sort of impact the applications in the ESU is. In and of itself, each of these tabs, as I say, is worth a certain amount of value, some a little bit more than others, but it gives you that holistic overall picture as we go down the various tabs. Master parent analysis. Introducing a little bit of terminology here. A master parent is the first level form of an application or UBE that we come to when we traverse the cross-reference that's built. So I'll put that in context. Let's say you've got the ESU alters a business function, a fairly low-level business function. And let's assume that business function is called by another function, which is called by 5 other functions. And each of those 5 functions is called by 5 different applications, or 3 applications and 2 UBEs. Those applications and UBEs at that level are the master parents. The first application or UBE in the chain, in the string of calls that refers to or ultimately calls the objects affected in the ESU. So they're parent objects. And what this the bit of information is telling us is that the first ones, there are 50 items where the application or the application form has the number of shortest paths. There are 4 shortest paths between it and the ESU objects below it. And in this case, there are 2 ESU objects below it. When we get it, ultimately, when you get into the heat map information, which we aren't covering today, but this is the sort of detail that you'd be drilling into eventually. Yeah, so the number of shortest paths between the parent and the ESU objects that sit below it. Then you can see the number of paths with the different, between 5 and 20 paths. So the master parent information is reasonably valuable. What's probably more important is this graph here, the total number of batch and interactive master parent applications that require testing. In this case, this is the entire set of apps and UBEs in your wider system. Remember, this data is specifically relevant to you as customers. It includes all your customizations, all of your custom objects, all of your copies of standard, the complete set of objects in your production environment. And in this particular example, we can see that nearly 98% of all apps and UBEs are unimpacted by the ESUs that we're applying. That means you don't have to test them. That's a good thing. Really, you're only interested in the 2% of objects that are affected in some way by the ESUs that you want to take. And breaking down that 2% sliver is in this graph here, where we give you the number of objects. In this case, there are only the purple ones and the yellow ones, but we give you the number of objects that are applications and UBEs that are directly affected. So they're in the ESU with no affected children. So it's just the application or the UBE is in the ESU. In this case, there are none of those. What we do have in the ESU are apps and UBEs that are directly affected, i.e. changed by Oracle. And there are child objects that they call also in the ESU. Now, these 2 criteria here are relatively easy to find because you can view what's in the ESU by the ESU documentation. What's a little bit harder to find, though, are these ones. Objects that are applications and UBEs that are not in the ESU themselves, so they haven't been changed by Oracle, but something that they call is. And these are the guys that are hard to find, more difficult to track down, that you may or may not have to test, but they've certainly been impacted. You may have to test these guys in order to be confident that the change coming through the door isn't going to negatively affect you guys as a business. Excuse me. Okay, so that's the master parent analysis. I'm not going to hang around too long on execution points because it is very, very similar to master parents. The execution point, as a distinction to a master parent, the execution point is the entry point of an application. So where your master parent form of an application might be the fix inspect form that calls some business function that's in the ESU, the execution point could be the work with form of the same application. So it's like the parent of the master parent, if you like. It's the entry point, it's the application that you call when you start a particular transaction. And we have the shortest paths, etc., from those execution points as well. Excuse me 1 second. Okay. As testing managers, it's important to know, obviously, what applications have changed, but what's really, really key is knowing how does it affect us as a business, as an organization, what parts of our business are impacted. And this particular screen gives us the answer to that where question. So 3 graphs are provided, one at the ESU level itself, so we can see what summary system codes are coming through the door in those ESUs. In this case, system code 1, 3, and 17. The summary system code is basically just the first 2 significant characters, 2 or 3 significant characters rolled up. If I were to choose system code, it could break this guy out into 17A, 17B, 17C, etc. So we supply the information at the ESU level, also at the master parent level, and at the execution point level. So just as a refresher, the master parents are the parent application at UBE that call the objects in the ESU. So even though only 3 summary system codes are coming through the door in these ESUs, those things are going to include, let's have a look at the object types. They're going to include some lower level objects. So business functions, possibly tables, data structures, business views, and these things are often shared, particularly tables and business functions, and shared by objects, as we can see here, across quite a number of system codes. Now, you may or may not use some of these system codes, and if you don't, well, that automatically rules out the need to test the objects in that area. But if we are heavy users of system code 42, sales order management, maybe we use system code 5, and we certainly use 1 because it's common foundation, then this graph is telling us that we have obviously more master parents impacted in those functional areas than others. So as heavy users of system code 42, well, that tells me as a test manager, I'd better talk to the people involved who help us out doing the testing in those functional areas first before I talk to others. We also provide the same information at the execution point level. Just as a matter of completeness, it's no accident that the execution point trend tends to follow the same as the master parents, because most of the time when your entry point to an application calls a subsidiary form, they are usually in the same system code. Not always, but typically they are. Okay, so that gives us the what's impacted or where is impacted. Next question is the who. Who is impacted in our organization? Now, I mentioned earlier when you do when you want one of these analyses performed, you'll run the extract process to capture the information from the ESU. As part of that extract process, you supply us the roles and or users in your organization that you want to be able to filter by when you see this analysis in the hub. And that enables you then to see who is impacted. So these roles are worked through in terms of which applications and UBEs are accessible by these various roles and users that you provide. And again, we give the information at the ESU level, probably not as relevant here as these 2 levels, master parent and execution point. But what this is telling me here is that I've pretty much got, I've got to talk to my CRM admin person pretty immediately if we're under time constraints here, because they are more heavily impacted. There are more applications and UBEs affected by this ESU installation for this person than there is for, say, this role here. So, just to give you a view of who in the organization is impacted and who do we need to bring into the testing sooner rather than later. Okay, so we've answered the where question, the what functionality question, the who's impacted question. Then we have some sort of housekeeping, some monitoring tools in the dashboard for ESU objects. This tells us in this case there were 40 ESU objects applied or needing to be, or will receive some kind of change that needs to be tested. At the moment, there are 21 untested. When you first come into this screen for the very first time, these 2 numbers will match, obviously, because nothing will have been flagged as tested yet. It talks about objects in the ESU that don't actually require testing. It's quite common for ESUs to apply objects or to contain objects that don't actually have any differences to what you already have. If they have no differences, you don't need to test them. You're only interested in these objects here that are in this 40. We provide a basic burn down chart as well, so you can track progress of the testing. As the testing takes place, obviously, users doing the testing, when they go into the testing heat map, are able to flag objects as tested, so you can monitor that progress from here. And finally, the ESU analysis gives us an overview of the objects in the ESUs that we applied. So in this particular case, it was only a single ESU with 52 objects in it to start with, but we were able to, first of all, take out 12 objects in those ESUs, and then they're ignored. And why are they ignored? This is standard Oracle JD Edwards functionality. When you apply an ESU into the system, the first thing it does is determine at the object level, is this object newer in the ESU or is it newer in the system? And if it's newer in the system, it's rejected. You don't want to overwrite a newer object with older code, right? That makes sense. So we follow exactly the same functionality and ignore objects that are older in the ESUs, in this case 12. And that leaves us with 40 objects that are installable. Now, if any of these objects are installable but match the object in your current system, they would be further ignored, and then this column would be lower to reflect that. In this case, all 40 are installable and receive some kind of change, so all 40 are changes that need to be tested. And in the testing required, we can see the ESU, we can see the objects involved, and here we can see the testing not required. In this case, there were none of those, and we can see the 12 objects that were ignored via those ESUs. So that brings us up to the half hour. That is the dashboard. Hopefully that looks good to you, and you can see how that can be used to help guide your test planning and management through Dimension Focus. As I say, we could drill down further into other aspects of it, but you know that's for another day. So thank you all, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact DWS, and yeah, I will thank you again and have a good day. Cheers.